Now for our roundtable with Anna Mancuso, a Republican political strategist, and News Channel 5 political analyst Brian Crowley. Former Florida Democratic Senator Bill Nelson had some interesting comments about his fellow Democrats, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who are advocating Medicare for all and an elimination of private insurance eventually. Nelson warned in a story in the Daily Beast that if either got the nomination, Donald Trump would win Florida. The former senator said, quote, "I say this with the greatest respect and admiration and friendship for those other senators who embrace Medicare for all. But the hard reality is it's going to be a stretch too far for the Democratic candidate." Nelson has, of course, been supporting very vociferously Joe Biden. Talk about the former Florida senator weighing in.
Well, it's always nice when a retired senator jumps into
Will it make an impact?
No.
None?
No. Voters are not going to decide. Voters don't decide who they're going to vote for by whoever endorses them.
But on the issue itself about whether Medicare for all works or not, I mean, you've seen it debate after debate that Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont, being questioned on this. No impact when you have a former Florida state or United States senator talking about this?
I don't think anybody will remember him saying that. I mean, remember the last election he ran for, he lost.
Well,
but even
barely.
so, barely, just
Barely.
by a hair.
Yeah.
But even
But
if we take it one step further, we see that until this starts threatening the pocketbooks of the senior population in Florida, then that could either cause them to step back from the election or cause them to go in another direction.
Michael Bloomberg, and I bring it up for among other reasons, says he might jump into the Democratic field, and with so many of our friends and neighbors who have New York roots, I'm sure that got some attention. The former New York mayor, Republican, independent, now Democrat, he's been across the political spectrum, but says he doesn't feel the Democratic field as it stands right now, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, might have what it takes to beat Trump, and that both would be a broadside against Joe Biden, the other presumptive moderate that he would try and fill that space for, and the Elizabeth Warrens and Bernie Sanders, for whom he thinks some of their prescriptions, like Medicare for all, may be too much. A Bloomberg candidacy. Do you think it happens?
Well, you know, with Bloomberg, it's hard to know because we've been down this road with him before. Obviously, you know, he said he would spend all of his own money. He's worth, if I recall
40
correctly,
billion or so.
50, I thought it was 52, but
Oh,
more
who's
money than we have.
Yeah.
And you know, for him to spend a couple of billion on a campaign would be easy money.
Is there space
If he
for him at this
actually
point?
gets in, you know, I think if he actually gets in, he can change the dynamic. I'm not saying he can win, but I think he can change the dynamic.
Mariana?
I think that he would.
He's played footsie with getting in before, as Brian rightly
He
says.
has, and every time it does, other states clutch their big gulp. Because that's the first thing he did when he got into office in New York City was he took everyone's big gulp from 7-Eleven. But I think, in all seriousness, I think that there's an opportunity for him, but he has to play by the rules, which he's already said that he doesn't want to play by the rules when it comes to getting on the debate stage, and he just wants to go out there and be basically the presumptive nominee, and that could be difficult.
And in a year where progressives seem to be holding sway, Elizabeth Warren doing well with them, progressives are already howling, look, it's another very rich guy who's going to come in and use all his money and take this away from progressives. So it's going to be an interesting battle within the party itself. President Trump has formally notified the United Nations the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, it allows the president to officially pull out the day after the presidential election. So if he wins re-election, he says we're out. Climate change, I happen to be working on a special report on sea level rise tied to climate change. Florida at ground zero for that, especially South Florida. Do comments like that, though, in the fray that we're in the middle of, get a lot of traction either way, those kind of statements, that kind of policy prescriptive?
I think on a day-to-day basis, I don't think climate change means much to the average voter. I think the Paris Accord means even less. And my example would be the algae blooms in the Treasure Coast. For decades, there's been talk about the problem with the Everglades, the problems with Lake Okeechobee. What finally got people to move was when these algae blooms started showing up in the Treasure Coast and in the west coast of Florida, and it got so pervasive that people rose up, and suddenly the government has to act. And I think right now, for a lot of people, climate change is still a theory. You know, we hear that much of Florida could wind up underwater, but we're not. And I think the algae bloom is sort of similar to that. Until we actually start feeling it happening, most people, I think, are not going to care.
Well,
Sadly.
I'll be showing you at home some maps that I was shown recently that
And it's
make you go,
scary.
wow. But as far as the issue itself, your take, Mariana?
I think that by pulling out of the Paris Accords, what we're seeing is that unfortunately it's taking us out of a global conversation to find solutions to reducing, carbon footprints and greenhouse gas emissions, and that's problematic. We don't have the ability to collaborate with our neighbors and our allies on the global stage, but this is just another part of the Trump presidency that we've continued to see, that he doesn't want to talk to anyone on the global stage.
The impeachment hearings begin this week. Look into your crystal ball. Brian always kicks me under the table when I ask him to look into his crystal ball, but I am. It's political drama, it's political theater, it's Democrats argue it's our Constitution and valuing it that's at stake. Republicans argue it's a charade. All of it's going to play into what people think about 2020. Mariana, your sense of how this may play out and its ultimate impact. Of course, we don't know where it will end up leading.
I think the Democrats are really going to have, a very tough act to follow. Like, they have to get this done in some form or fashion. Otherwise, they're going to be pegged as being a witch hunt. It's based on junk science in the terms of the Republicans, and if they cannot deliver an impeachment from the House and then force the hand in the Senate, it will literally look like a dog and pony show, which up to this point, as Brian had mentioned before we had gone on air, that it currently has been. So it's really up to the Democrats, and this is their impeachment to lose.
Brian?
Democrats haven't come up with the soundbite yet. They need to, just as soon as Michael Bloomberg's announced that he might get in, Trump started calling him Little Michael. And he's a master at that. And I'm not saying that the Democrats need to come up with a Little Michael, but I think right now the whole Ukraine thing and the quid pro quo is a little too complicated for most people as they go about their daily lives. And they're not necessarily seeing a there yet. And I think as these public hearings start, clarity on behalf of the Democrats is going to be very, very important if they want to make their case. And right now, I think the Republicans are doing a pretty good job beating up on them.
Very briefly in our minute, as we really start pointing to 2020, you all are talking to people all over the state all the time. What's the sense you get as pretty soon the political parade will be coming to Florida and people are going to have to sort out between these candidates soon enough? Mariana?
They are, and I think they're already fatigued. It's problematic, but I think that when we look ahead to 2020, especially after we're heading into the holiday season, and so I think the first hurdle for Floridians is to be able to come together with their family at the dinner table and have conversations that are not insightful, right? And to really make sense of all of that.
Insightful, but not insightful with the C-I-T-E.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. I want it to be a very, kumbaya moment.
Brian, as you look to 2020, Biden here talks back, he'll harken back to Obama, Elizabeth Warren rising, Bernie Sanders. It does look like it's going to ultimately be those big three. Buttigieg is trying to leverage in Iowa and other places. But your sense?
Well, with the Bloomberg asterisk
Right.
now, and everybody's always asking me to predict elections, and I always say I can't predict elections because every election cycle has surprises.
Just the shape of the field.
So with that caveat, for Florida voters, by the time the primary in March gets to Florida, we're going to be down to 2, 3, maybe 4 candidates, and we don't know who those are yet. One of them could be Michael Bloomberg, and that may be his path. So for Florida voters, they don't even really know who their candidates are yet.
So enjoy the holidays, and come January, we'll all talk about it more. Closing comments.
Drink champagne, drink wine, have a beer.
Closing comments in just a moment.